When did they meet?
Early 1944. Like in the summer of 1944.
Okay.
Right after my father heard that they kind of knew, my father, since he was in underground, he kind of knew that once they were deported, his mother and his sisters, to Auschwitz, that it was going to be over. So he migrated down south to Bucharest, which was the capital of Romania, which was already almost under Russian control. Remember, in the summer of 1944, the part that is not Hungary, that didn't go back to Hungary, capitulated and went back to Russia. And that's why the Hungarians took that part back of northern Transylvania. And that's why they were deporting all those Jews from Sighet, like Elie Wiesel's, and from Zaidi's place, Shimlo and Cluj. All those peoples were deported in the spring of 1944 and to concentration camps. So Romania had changed sides to the Russians then.
To the Allies.
To the Allies, right? Which Russians were the Allies at the time, and Russia was coming from the east, from the Eastern Front, right? And sort of they were already friends with Romania, and Bucharest was the capital of Romania, and there was a lot of Jewish refugees that ended up in Bucharest, the capital of Romania. And my mother wanted to go to Israel. The way to go to Israel at that time was to take a boat from a port from the Black Sea, which Romania bordered, and take a boat down and to Haifa and get to Israel through a boat. But there was it wasn't. They didn't go onto like vacation boats that you see docked. The Queen Elizabeth or the Queen Mary that were docked on it wasn't even passenger boats. It was freight boats. It was boats that took cargo boats, and that's how you got from Romania, from Eastern Europe to Israel at the time. They illegally booked passage. Illegally. There was the British from Palestine, the British landed in Palestine in 1943-44, even though they were on the Allied side, they did not allow immigration of Jews into Palestine. There was like a quota. The Arabs were protesting, and even though there was a Balfour Declaration saying that the land of Palestine, Israel, will be divided between the Arabs and the Jews, and the Jews, it's the homeland of the Jewish people, and Jews were living there throughout the millennia. My father and my mother met in Bucharest, so my mother, the way to travel was to get to a port, but in order to get to that port, you had to take a train ride from Bucharest to get to that port. And so she ended up in Bucharest because she was going to take that train ride to the port city and get on this freighter ship and get to Palestine, because she was really an ardent Zionist. She really was a very, very strong Zionist. Like when my father was like making a joke, later on I remember as I was growing up, my mother would sing the Israel's national anthem called Shir Amallah V'Shuvah Shivasi, and then my father would go Shir Amallah V'Shuvah. They had like dueling Shir Amallas. It was like a joke. It was like a joke because my mother was like very ardent Zionist, and my father had all these relatives.
So she sung the tune
for the
national anthem of Israel, and he sung the tune of the traditional version.
Traditional version. They used to kibitz with each other about that. And my mother was a very strong Zionist. She really wanted to go to Israel, particularly because of family. But anyway, so her sisters and her brothers, since she was the youngest girl, so she comes there and her siblings gave her money and clothing and bags to travel. And she meets my father. There was like Jewish kitchens. You had to pay a minimal sum to get in, or you get a meal ticket, depending on where you were. And my father met my mother. My mother said, "Oh, I'm going to Israel." So my father said, "Okay, have a nice life," because he wasn't going to Israel. He was either going to go back. He wanted to go back home to understand what was going on with his parents. And this was in the end of the summer, beginning of the fall of 1944.
So they're online to get a meal ticket, or is it outside of like Jewish kitchen?
No, they met. They met. There was like Jewish kids getting together, young people, refugees, and they met. And they were talking, and they hit it off.
What was the first place?
Huh?
What was like the first place they met?
Like this restaurant, it's like this Friday night kitchen place where they each went to get food, for Friday night for Shabbat, and they got a meal ticket, and then she had money. But then she was going to leave on Sunday or Monday during of the week. The train was going to go to this port city of Romania, where the freighter was waiting for them, and then. She's waiting by the train station, and all of a sudden there's sirens, which was not unusual.
What did she leave after? Was she with him?
No.
So she goes to the train station.
Like Monday, Tuesday.
Right, in 1944.
Right, in September of 44, and it wasn't unusual to have an air raid. Like maybe it was Germany coming because the Russians were already very close. It was really on the front almost. On the front lines. Remember, Romania went back to Russia, so who knows? It could have been Germany or coming to bomb Bucharest. So they, which was not unusual. So they went ahead and
to the bomb shelters.
They went to the bomb shelters, but they didn't have time to bring their belongings.
They dropped
their
everything.
Suitcases, and their bags. You couldn't take them down to the air raid shelter. So anyway, after the air raid was like for a minute or 2 minutes or 3 minutes, and then they come back up, and there was no bombing. It was a fake air raid. It was like a bunch of robbers that came in and deliberately set off the alarms. And the people would go down to the air shelters. When they came back, all the belongings were gone. Don't forget, these were wartime. Anything valuable, even clothing, was valuable during the war times. So whatever was in the suitcases, these robbers were able to resell. Because in war times, it wasn't like you'd go shopping in Fifth Avenue or down Central Avenue to the malls. It was like you couldn't go shopping. You didn't have money. Nobody worked. Either you were drafted in the army. It wasn't normal life during wartime. So these robbers took their belongings, and my mother was totally devastated. All her money and belongings were gone because she packed a lot of her money into the suitcases because she didn't want to hold it with her because she was afraid. She kind of took it as a sign. She didn't know what to do. And then the next, Thursday, Friday came along, and she was kind of devastated. She only had the money that was on her. And she had to probably and she comes to the soup kitchen Friday night, and she didn't have a ticket. And my father says, "Hey, what are you doing here? I thought you went to Israel. What happened?" So my mother proceeds to tell him the story, starts crying, and she doesn't have a meal ticket. And so my father says, "Why don't you take the meal ticket? Take mine." And he gave her his meal ticket, and she was like so grateful. That she gave him the meal ticket, and
Did he not?
No, he gave her the whole thing. I don't know how much it was. Maybe she gave him a pizza. Who knows? And then they started dating, but she took it as a sign that she was not going to go to Israel. Like maybe God didn't want her to go to Israel at that time, that she was going to go later. So she was going to stay in Bucharest. She wrote back to her parents. She didn't know what she was going to do. She wasn't sure that she wanted to date Zaidi, by the way. Even after that story. Because she tells another story that he asked her for a date, and she was like very distraught, and she really stood him up. So the next time they met, he goes ahead and tells her. He doesn't say, "Why did you stand me up? Why did you show up?" he said, "Oh, I'm so sorry I couldn't come. I was detained. There was a letter from back home, and I thought my sister was alive. Blah blah blah, and I was going to get a letter, and I had to go to my brother, and he made up a big story why he couldn't see her, and then he didn't act as if she didn't show up, but he didn't take no for an answer. You know what I mean? So he was more very persistent. By the way, can I back up to something? By the way, her family was pretty upper middle class, the Frankels. There was, in the 1930s, don't forget, there was a depression all over the world. Not only in the United States, but in Europe as well. The world economy was very depressed. Germany, Hitler only came to power because of that depression. Devaluation of the currencies and so on. So they were so middle class, the Frankels. There was a very, 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 very wealthy family in Temeshvar by the name of the Schönbrunns. They were very wealthy, and during the Depression, they lost a lot of money in Temeshvar. And the Frankels were upper middle class. They weren't super, super wealthy, but they were middle class business, which was nice. They didn't lack for money or food. In that culture, the way the dating went is you came to the house. The parents came from another city sometimes, and they came to the house, and they came to dinner with the child, with the boy or girl, and sometimes they'd leave the boy and girl to talk to each other or go for a walk or go out, and that was the date. But the parents came to meet the other parent, the other side. The two parents came to see it, and the two parents actually decided whether it was going to be a match or not, depending how observant or how extreme the religious they were. But they went to visit, and money was a big, big factor. How wealthy you were. So wealth was a very important factor to get a shidduch. And then, and he has no family, no dowry, no family background. That whole thing really was true, even in the city. So, but the Schönbrunns, the wealthier you were, the more of a better match you got. Like wealth went to wealth. And the Schönbrunns didn't have money, and they had to sell their fancy linens and fancy dishes, dish towels and dishes. So whenever there was a basho, they called it a basho in Yiddish, when their families came together or whether the boy came to meet the girl to the house, they would borrow the Frankels dishes and the Frankels linens, put them in their closets to see that they're fully stocked, even though they had lost a lot of money and they were actually poor